So warm welcome to our next webinar, which today's topic is a topic that's been requested by people coming through our coach training courses. We've had a number of requests really to learn from experienced internal coaches. And so the title of today's session is Lessons Learned from Being an Internal Coach. And I'm delighted to have in the discussion today some really experienced internal coaches, but also people that I've worked with for a long time now. So I'm really firstly going to say thank you for making the time today and for sharing your experience with us as well. So what I'd suggest we do is just some short introductions, just so that people watching get a sense of the group, and then we'll start to move into our discussion about internal coaching. So Nish, I'm going to come to you first, if you're happy to introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, I'm Nish. I've worked as an internal coach for 14 years now, first 10 of which were at KPMG, and towards the end of that time I co-led the coaching offer for the UK business, and the last 4 of which I've been working part-time in a Spanish investment bank called Elantra.
Thanks, Nish. Brodie, if I come to you next.
Hi everybody, so I'm Brodie. I work for Charles Russell Speechlys, which is a global law firm. I'm based in London. I've been there for 4 years as an internal coach, and I also run my own business, coaching and team coaching.
Thanks, Brodie. And then Amisha, let's come to you.
Hi, Amisha Wild. I work at Network Rail at the moment. I've worked in various other organisations, and over the last 18 years, I've kind of worked as an internal coach and also led our internal coaching functions as well.
Thanks, Amisha. And last but certainly not least, let's go to Debs.
Thanks, Damien. Good afternoon. I'm Debs Butler. I currently head up the coaching and mentoring at NFU Mutual, and also have my own coaching practice as well.
Thanks, Debs. Thank you. Yeah, and just to say to the group watching, so before I left my corporate life, I was an internal coach for probably about 10 years. So I'm really interested in today's discussion to see, how things may be different now or similar to my own experiences. And what I thought we would do is just go through a number of questions, and what I'm going to do is invite each of the panelists to share their reflections in terms of the question, and we'll just see how the conversation builds, if that's okay with everybody. So we've called this webinar Lessons Learned from Being an Internal Coach. So I think we'll start there actually, in terms of, from your experience, what would you say are the lessons that you've learned? And it'd be great to sort of hear some of your reflections on that question. So Nish, I'm gonna come to you first, I think, with this question.
Oh, thank you, Damien. Plenty. I've learned plenty of lessons, some very personal, but I guess I was thinking about, what makes the internal coaching dynamic different, and kind of what's important in that space in terms of lessons that I learned. I think in particular, being really clear about what coaching is and what coaching isn't. And particularly on the edges of people sometimes wanting you to be a substitute for effective performance management or for training. I think coaching has a lovely place that can complement both of those things, but helping to educate the system around the role of coaching and how coaching can work with other parts of the business to kind of support individuals, I think is really important. It's not necessarily a stand all, fix all plaster for a lot of things that I think sometimes it ends up being pushed our way. So being really clear on that. And then on the other side, kind of being able to position coaching in a way that aligns with what we see as the objectives or the strategic priorities of the business can really help as well. So people can see the relevance, people can see the connectivity. I mean, both points really are about coaching's place in the business, and kind of finding a clean, solid space for it in the system, I think makes a huge difference to how people engage.
Yeah, thanks, Nish. And I'm really hearing that sort of differentiation actually in terms of that sort of education piece that the internal coach can play, but also, as you said, really supporting coaching to be positioned in the business and aligned with needs actually. Yeah. Thank you. So Brodie, let's come to you. So I suppose hearing this share, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I actually totally agree with Nish there. I think it's is really important, that sort of expectation from the business. And with that, just thinking about the tripartite meetings that you have and really sort of thinking about how you make sure there's some transparency. Because, you know, I guess my lessons learned, if we don't have that, it can change the dynamic and expectation. So really sort of being clear. From my experience also, to Nish's point really is, the leader or whatever seeks you out to engage with somebody they're managing around performance management or whatever, but actually having the conversation with the leader, what conversations have you had with this person, rather than actually being that substitute. So really being clear on that transparent piece is really important. And the other piece really, I think for me, is a piece around integrity. So as both the internal one-to-one coach, but also the team coach. So I might actually be coaching somebody on a one-to-one level, and then all of a sudden that team wants coaching, and actually being transparent about that, but also that confidentiality piece, and not bringing that into the environment of the team coaching or anywhere else. So integrity and confidentiality is key for me as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bodhi. And it's we'll talk about challenges in a moment, but that sense of actually, you know, as an internal coach, you may need to hold your authority, because I suppose sometimes perhaps the system might try and push that bit as well, like you're saying, either about roles in terms of abdicating some responsibility, but then also that bit of, you know, really holding that boundary of confidentiality, which, you know, is critical. Yeah, thank you. So Misha, let's hear some reflections from you in terms of your lessons.
I think one of the biggest things for me as an internal coach versus coaching externally is that actually you probably know about the context. You probably are subject to some of the politics that go on within the business. And depending on how big the organization is, you're likely to know some of the stakeholders that the coachee is talking about. And all of them are actually really difficult to manage. You know, what's my stuff? What's the coachee's stuff? So one is about really being aware of it, being aware that it is there, and that is the reality of the situation, and that's okay, because you can't get away from it being an internal coach. But the other thing is about sometimes when it gets in the way, and people, I'm sure, when you work as an internal coach, can hear, and Amisha, you know what that's like, and Amisha, you know what so and so's like. So how do you have some tricks up your sleeve so you don't get drawn into that collusion? And a lot of it comes down to contracting and boundaries, but also not being afraid to call it out, to say that that's what's happening in that coaching session. And they're two things that are actually, I think for me, are definitely really important working as an internal coach.
Yeah, thanks, Amisha. And I suppose, you know, if you think back to when perhaps you're less experienced, you know, often that, again, those hooks that can sort of pull you into that collusion with the politics or whatever, it can be harder to challenge that, I suppose, and name it. But again, I suppose it just shows you the importance of being aware of it, as you're saying, you know. Yeah, thank you. So Debs, let's come to you in terms of, so it's hearing the other share, just what else you'd like to add to this.
Thank you. I think just building on what's been said, I think contracting well at the start is so key. You know, we've spoken about confidentiality, we've spoken about safe space. And I think sometimes I call it corridor conversations. And I sort of contract around that with the client to say, look, if you see me having a conversation with somebody in your team or your line manager, you know, please know that it has nothing to do with our coaching relationship. It will be completely separate to that. So I think that is really important to bring that into the space and to say that, and to say, actually, if you do see me having a conversation, let's talk about it in our next session. You know, if you have any questions at all around that, so that it is an absolutely confidential, safe container that we're building. And I think the other thing I'd say, Damien, is that supervision for me has been essential. Particularly one-to-one supervision has been a real key learn, particularly in my early days managing the coaching where I am, to actually have my own supervision has been really key.
Yeah, thanks, Debs. Thank you. And I saw some nods as you said that, because I suppose, especially when you've got a dual role, when you're heading up coaching as well as offering the coaching, I really hear that importance of that sort of space for you to be able to reflect on your practice. And a bit around the sort of corridor conversations. I can remember coming out of a meeting once with a leader, and then sitting outside the room was one of my coachees, and they flushed. I can remember them flushing when they saw me. And so, as you're saying, sort of finding some language to normalize that, because you are part of the system. The reality is, it is likely you're going to be involved in other conversations, but to make that is still okay,
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I suppose just before I offer another question, I just want to see if there's anything anybody wants to add to anything that's been shared so far, or whether there's another thought that's arisen just from what you've all shared so far.
Amy, can I just build on what Debs has just said? I think that there's something else that we always talk about, looking after the coachee as we should, and we've got a responsibility towards our coaches, but there's something about looking after yourselves as well. And that's something that we need to do within a internal coaching context, especially around confidentiality. I think I've been caught off guard once when my coachee randomly started telling everyone I was her coach, and I hadn't fully appreciated she was going to do that. Taught me a big lesson very early on in my coaching days about just talking about what does that actually mean for both of us.
Yeah, no, great. And I can relate to that. I can have been in a meeting and two coaches started talking about me as their coach, So again, yeah, because it works both ways, because we often put a lot of focus on the coachee, but we're part of the system. So it's really important that that's there for us as well. It's really helpful. So I think let's sort of bring this in terms of challenges, which often lead to the learning. But when you think back to your experience as an internal coach, what have been some of your challenges? And I think this time, Misha, we're going to sort of come back to you just to kick this one off.
Yeah, I'm actually going to build on something that Brodie was just talking about in response to the last discussion around within an organisation, when people might get sent for coaching, or where you've got an internal stakeholder that's got a real vested interest, knows you as the coach, and how do you actually manage all of that confidentiality and satisfying all stakeholders in that? So I guess in that instance, and I said it before, it's always down to the contracting and being really clear with the sponsor, line manager, whoever that is, around what the coaching is. But the other thing about it is, when someone is, I'll say, sent for coaching, which is quite a strong language, what's their engagement like in the coaching, and what are they really wanting to do with the coaching? And there's a big bit of selling that we need to do as internal coaches to try to make that work for the coachee as well as the line manager sponsor. And in my experience, internal coaching, we're just not great at doing the three-way contracting. And that is very tricky. So even knowing what three-way contracting is, how do we facilitate those conversations so we can get to an agreed private goals, public goals place, is actually really tricky.
Yeah, and that sort of engagement piece of, you said they're the coachee, but also the line manager in that, isn't it? In terms of their responsibility versus yours. Yeah, I'm really interested in that, actually, because I think again, it's a way that organizations can really demonstrate the return of expectation around the coaching. And it's interesting that sometimes that's more of a challenge with internal coaching. Yeah, thank you. How about you, Debs? In terms of challenges now, what would you say are some of the challenges you've experienced?
Working from home today, Damien, I'm surrounded by chargers, and I've been thinking about this question, and I think the key piece that I would say around advice is for us to be refreshed and recharged as coaches. you know, we can't give out from an empty cup. And I think, you know, we charge our devices daily, phones, iPads. But for us, actually, I think it's really important as coaches that we have time away to look after our own well-being, whether that be daily, weekly, monthly. For me, I go on 2 retreats a year as a coach to go on the annual CPD event that Catalyst run. But I think it's so important that we look after ourselves and that we keep updated and we keep refreshed with new tools and techniques. So I would say that it's really important that, you know, for us, we're often giving out to other people and being their thinking partner. But how do we look after ourselves to keep, you know, in the best shape that we can?
Mm. Yeah, and I think especially when coaching might be part of what we do, you know, especially if we're a job plus coach, you know, we're doing coaching alongside of our day job, and often we try and fit that in around our other work. It can be even more of a challenge to, as you're saying, you know, build that time in.
Yeah,
really.
absolutely. And I always have, you know, time either side of my coaching before and after. Because if I don't, then I'm not the best coach and not giving, you know, the best to my clients. So having that time and space for myself to switch off and to be fully present is really key for me.
Yeah, and so true. I was talking to an internal coach the other day whose space either side was getting taken up by their PA with a good intent, was building in other things. And actually then he just changed it to be a coaching session rather than having reflection time either side. But he was still having it, but it looked like just the coaching session in his diary, you know. Yeah, thanks, Debs. So how about if we go to Brodie next? So when you think about challenges, what would you add to this?
Yeah, so just popping back to Amisha's comments, really. One thing I'd also add is I have in the past refused to coach people and suggested I actually coach the line manager to support them to manage the individual, because actually it's not my role to manage that. So I think, again, just navigating that conversation with the line manager, the leader, whatever it might be, and suggest a different approach, I found to be very useful. Some of the other challenges around when coaching is started to be seen as something that's very useful and helpful and appreciated is then the amount of people that then want coaching and the bandwidth to be able to actually provide that. So I think that is a key challenge. And in the initial stages, it was potentially seen as remedial, and now there's a real emphasis on this is the best thing. So actually managing to manage and navigate that. And the final one I just want to throw in is we often talk about having 6 coaching sessions, and it's kind of like, why 6? Do you know what I mean? Where's that come from? Because actually in some situations it might only need 3. So again, I think it's just as much as we have that process and that format, sometimes it needs to be why 6. It doesn't mean say it's ongoing, but actually why 6? So they're my moments of sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Brodie. And it's helpful, isn't it? Because like you're saying, you know, with a good intent, suddenly coaching becomes something that's seen as really valuable, and then there's a sense of, well, the floodgates have opened now in terms of the needs, and then actually how do you serve those, you know, especially if the internal coaching is a, you know, a small resource actually. Yeah, Nish, let's come to you in terms of challenges.
My thinking was very much in line with what Debs and Brodie have been saying, and kind of I was thinking, for me, the biggest challenge has always been overtrading and kind of holding those boundaries and kind of respecting my time. And it's really interesting working in the dynamic where we had internal and external coaches, and to see sometimes how people perceive the difference. And I think part of that came in how an external sometimes approached a contract or a piece of work. But I think so much of it came into the inner game of the internal coaches to how we positioned ourselves. And so I think that's part of the challenge too, is how do you perceive yourself? How do you see your role in the system and kind of get that sense of worth? And part of it is kind of not overtrading. It's respecting your time. It's kind of holding those boundaries. It's doing the work pre and post that kind of helps you to ground kind of what you've learned and built through your sessions, and then prep in a way that you need to. And I'm always tempted to say yes, because I kind of think I could help here and I could help there. And one of the things that kind of I found challenging, but so did the team at KPMG, was to be really clear about where we were going to say no, because it's not a panacea for everything, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Nish. I mean, like, knowing you all as I do, and I know that you've all got professional practices, and you have a professional offering in line with, if it was an external coach or internal coach, it's the same standards. I know how I suppose, just going off tangent a bit, because I'm really interested in that bit of, I suppose, where have you focused coaching then? You know, if there is a potential floodgate, I suppose, what's worked for you in the past in terms of being able to perhaps focus coaching a bit more, the internal coaching resources there. But just if there's anybody that has a reflection to that, it'd be wonderful to hear your thoughts on that one.
Can I start? Is that okay?
Sure.
I think kind of the most straightforward access point for me has always been around transitions. You know, whether it's experienced senior hires, people going on maternity, paternity leave, people progressing through a system. I think those are useful places because people are taking a step back to look at what they bring, how they bring it, and what they want. So that there's an obvious kind of bit of gap analysis, if you like, that people are going through, that means that actually coaching can really help with the thinking process. I think a place where it's really rich and valuable, but is sometimes harder to position coaching around, is the time to think for senior leaders and leadership coaching. But I think kind of if there's any place where you can get the most ripples from an internal offer or an external offer, it's there.
Yeah, thanks, Nish. Thank you. Brodie?
Yeah, so our offering coaching generally is through we have development programs for different levels within the business, and so it comes as part of that program. They get one-to-one coaching. So for some, and obviously with a business focus, but for some it is about leadership development, and actually part of the development program is about them as leaders. And technically they may be brilliant, but actually this whole leadership piece is more challenging. And I would say to Nish's point, there's actually that the appreciation is to be able to step back and think differently, and different perspectives. And on saying that, we also do it to have coaching for our junior employees as well. So, and that can be business services or sort of fee earners, solicitors. So again, there's an opportunity for them to be making sense of their world around specific areas. So majority of it is aligned to a program, although obviously there are other bits outside of that that may come forward as well.
Yeah, thank you. Debs?
Just building on that, so we have now we've moved to all of our internal coaches to support with our leadership development programs, which is great. But we also look at the whole employee life cycle. So again, just building on what Nish said, you know, when people join us, they are offered to have a coach or a mentor, and then through various different transitions as they change roles, you know, they can have coaching there to support them. We've just launched a new group for our senior leaders, senior focus groups, where we have mini masterclasses, and they're also offered a coach as their thinking partner, which has worked really well in the last few months. So it's sort of a wide range across the business, and we've opened up coaching to everybody who is an employee as well, which is, you know, works really well with our D&I program as well.
Yeah, thank you. Because a sense of some proactive, isn't it, offering, but then also, you know, taking on board people that might not have access to if they're not on a program. Yeah, thank you. Misha, anything you want to add to that just before I'm possible?
I think we have a combination of the two. We definitely have associated and aligned to leadership programs. Anyone that's on one of our leadership programs in particular is offered the opportunity to work with a coach. But equally, in the last 18, 24 months or so, we've opened it out. So on our intranet, it is an open offer. And the way it's positioned is for career development. And of course, anything kind of comes into career development. It's quite broad, the kind of themes that we see coming through. But that's how it's positioned. So, and very much very supportive of what Deb's just said, is around the whole purpose of that is so that you don't just get it because you know somebody who's a coach, or because your manager knows a coach. So it's very much self-driven.
Yeah, great. So time is flying by. Could we spend the afternoon having this conversation? But I suppose just as a way of closing, because I suppose there's going to be a number of people that are training as internal coaches, maybe been practicing for a while. I suppose if you were, let me ask a question. If you were sort of giving yourself some advice in terms of when you were first coaching, what advice would you give anyone now in terms of being an internal coach? So what advice would you give them? And let's start with Debs this time. So what advice?
What a great question, Damien. I think it's really important to celebrate successes. So what we do at NFU Mutual is we have an annual coaches celebration week, actually, where we come together. We have awards that we give to our coaches. We have afternoon tea together to celebrate us as a team. I think coaching can be a lonely profession and isolating, so it's great, I think, to come together as a whole group. But then quarterly, what we do, Damien, is we have coaching action learning groups where all of our coaches are in groups of around 6, again, where they can come together, share best practice, and just talk and network together. So my advice would be to have regular supervision, to network with other coaches, and also celebrate successes as well together.
Great. Thanks, Debs. Thank you. Amisha, what's your advice?
The most of my advice, I think people have already shared, but I just want to reiterate what Brodie was saying around the number of sessions. It's important to close. I have a real pet peeve around dependency relationships, and that is harder in an internal world where you're not necessarily paying for a coaching service. So that's one thing. And also, if you've come to the end of coaching objectives by session 3, sometimes people feel compelled to just carry on to session 6 because that's what was advertised. And I think we're doing a lot more in the space of it's guidance rather than it's 6 sessions, which helps position it. But I think that's really important. That whole piece around closing when it comes to an end is really important.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Otherwise, it's just constant coffees. Thanks, Amisha. Nish, what would you like to add in terms of what would your advice be?
I think building on Debbie's point, find your people. And I think kind of supervision has an important part to play. I've also always had a mentor in the business, somebody quite senior who looks at the business in a different way to me. And I found that hugely helpful, kind of for helping me structure my thinking, challenge my thinking, give me access to kind of some of the themes in the business, and help me find that way to knit some of the offer together.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nish. And Brodie, what would your advice be?
My advice would be, so I have my own business as well. So when I'm coaching somebody, I almost try and put my external hat on, so that I don't get too contaminated by the system. So I find that a useful tool to tap into.
Yeah, great, Brodie. Thank you. So I'm conscious of sort of fast approaching time. I really appreciate your sharing of your experience and also in terms of the advice as well. I mean, I think it's so helpful, but just the honesty around some of the challenges as well. I'm sure this would be a really helpful resource for internal coaches that are really reflecting on their practice. So thank you for doing this today.